My name is Georgine. I'm 34, and I've been married into the prestigious Williams family for 5 years. My husband James is a wonderful architect and the love of my life, but his mother Eleanor has always found subtle ways to let me know I don't quite measure up. The annual Christmas party at their estate is something I've come to dread, but this year was different. This year, I finally found my voice. I stood up for myself after years of silent suffering, and let me tell you, the look on Eleanor's face was something I'll never forget. Before I tell you what happened at that Christmas party, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, raised by hardworking parents who taught me the value of compassion and determination. My father was a factory worker and my mother an elementary school teacher. We weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. I worked my way through nursing school, pulling double shifts at a local diner to pay tuition. By the time I met James, I was working as a registered nurse in the intensive care unit at Detroit General Hospital. James and I met when he came to visit his college roommate after a car accident. I was the nurse assigned to his friend's care. James would bring coffee for the nursing staff during his visits, and we started talking. Despite his privileged background, James was down-to-earth kind and genuinely interested in my work. After his friend was discharged, James asked me out, and within 6 months we were inseparable. When James proposed after a year of dating, I was over the moon. Then came the dinner where I would meet his family. The Williams lived in a sprawling mansion in Grosse Pointe, with manicured gardens and a view of Lake St. Clair. Walking into their home for the first time felt like entering a museum where I might break something priceless with one wrong move. Eleanor Williams. My future mother-in-law greeted me with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She looked me up and down in my department store dress and asked about my little job at the hospital. Throughout dinner, she made comments about James finally settling down and how she had almost given up hope after his string of suitable girlfriends from families they had known for generations. James's father, Thomas, was warmer, asking genuine questions about my work and upbringing. Robert James' older brother seemed indifferent to my presence, more focused on his investment banking career than family matters. It was clear from that first meeting that I would never be the daughter-in-law Eleanor had envisioned for her son. Despite the cold reception, James and I married in a ceremony that was a compromise between my simpler tastes and Eleanor's insistence on certain traditions. Throughout our 5 years of marriage, Eleanor's disapproval manifested in countless ways, correcting my table manners at family dinners, questioning my career choices, suggesting hairstylists and clothing stores to help me look more appropriate. Then there was Catherine, Robert's wife of 7 years. Catherine came from a family almost as wealthy as the Williams, with the right education connections and pedigree. She had attended the same private schools as Robert, summered at the same exclusive resorts, and moved in the same social circles. Catherine worked part-time at an art gallery owned by a family friend, sat on 3 charity boards, and always dressed impeccably. Eleanor adored Catherine. At every family gathering, she would showcase Catherine's latest achievements. The charity gala she had organised, her interior decorating, featured in a local magazine, the connections she had made with important people. Catherine just has a natural sense of what's appropriate, Eleanor would say within my earshot. I tried everything to win Eleanor's approval. I studied wine to understand her collection, learnt to cook some of the Williams family recipes, bought expensive gifts for birthdays and Christmas that stretched our budget. I volunteered for the hospital charity board, hoping she would see I could contribute to causes too. Nothing worked. My efforts were either ignored or met with faint praise, followed by stories of Catherine's superior accomplishments. James noticed his mother's behaviour, but avoided confrontation. "That's just how she is, Georgine," he would say. "She grew up in a different world. She'll warm up eventually." But 5 years had passed and the temperature remained frigid. The past year had been particularly difficult. I had been passed over for a promotion at work, and James and I had been trying unsuccessfully to start a family. Each month that passed without a pregnancy added to my stress. Meanwhile, Catherine announced she was expecting their second child, to Eleanor's uncontained delight. "The Williams family name will continue," she declared at a family dinner, not even glancing in my direction. As December approached, the annual Williams Christmas party loomed like a dark cloud on my horizon. It was Eleanor's showcase event, where she invited extended family business associates and social connections to display the family's success and solidarity. And once again, I would have to navigate the minefield of her subtle insults and Catherine's perfection. But this year, something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of all those slights, or maybe it was simply time to stop trying to be someone I wasn't. Either way, I had no idea that this Christmas party would become the turning point in my relationship with the entire Williams family. The weeks leading up to the Christmas party were filled with the usual anxiety, but this year it felt more intense. I spent hours at the mall searching for the perfect dress, something that would finally earn Eleanor's approval while still feeling like me. After visiting 12 stores, I found it a deep green velvet dress with a modest neckline and a flattering silhouette. It cost more than I would normally spend nearly a full week's salary, but I convinced myself it was worth it. "You look beautiful," James said when I tried it on at home. "Mum will love it." I wasn't so sure, but his encouragement gave me hope. Next came the gift shopping. Eleanor was notoriously difficult to buy, for as she would donate or re-gift anything she deemed unsuitable. This year I had done my research. Through conversations with James, I learnt that Eleanor had been looking for a rare first edition book on European architectural history. After weeks of calling specialty bookstores and online searches, I found a copy. It cost nearly $1,000 money we had been saving for a weekend getaway, but James agreed it was a strategic investment in family peace. "Just try to keep things pleasant this year," James said as he wrapped the book in expensive paper. Mum's been under stress with Dad's health issues. Thomas had been experiencing minor heart problems, though nothing serious according to his doctors. "Just smile and nod even if she says something that bothers you." I nodded, but inside I wondered why it was always my responsibility to keep the peace. Why was James never asking his mother to be kinder to his wife? 3 days before the party, I made a special trip to a farmer's market 2 hours away to get the specific apples Eleanor's grandmother had always used in her famous Christmas pie recipe. I had asked for the recipe last year, and Eleanor had reluctantly shared it, clearly expecting me to fail. This year, I was determined to get it right. The morning of the party, I woke up at 5 a.m. to start baking. The pie had to cool properly before we left for the Williams estate at 4 p.m. I followed each step meticulously, double-checking measurements and baking time. When it came out of the oven, the pie looked perfect golden brown, with a lattice top, the rich scent of cinnamon and apples filling our apartment. While the pie cooled, I went to the salon for a blowout and makeup application. Another expense I couldn't really afford, but I needed the confidence boost. The stylist did a wonderful job giving me soft curls that framed my face and makeup, that enhanced my features without looking overdone. Back home, I carefully packed the pie in a special carrier and changed into my dress. As I fastened my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable jewelry I owned, anxiety tightened my chest. I practiced deep breathing techniques I often recommended to my anxious patients. "You look stunning," James said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Are you ready?" "As I'll ever be," I replied, forcing a smile. During the hour-long drive to his parents' estate, James gave me his usual pre-party pep talk. "Remember my cousins Lisa and Amy like you. Stick with them if Mum gets to be too much. Uncle George loves hearing hospital stories. And Dad always enjoys talking to you." I nodded, half listening, as I mentally rehearsed polite responses to potential Eleanor barbs. We had played this scene so many times before it felt like reading from a well-worn script. As we pulled up the long driveway lined with professionally installed Christmas lights, the Williams mansion came into view. 3 stories of old money and tradition, every window glowing with warm light that somehow never made me feel welcome. James handed the car keys to the valet and we walked up the stone steps, my hand clutching his arm a bit too tightly. Thomas opened the door before we could ring the bell. Georgine James, come in out of the cold. His genuine smile was a stark contrast to Eleanor's, who appeared behind him in a designer red dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "James, darling," she said, embracing her son before turning to me with a practiced smile. "Georgine, that's certainly a festive colour." The first dig of the night, and we hadn't even taken off our coats. Thomas took the pie carrier from my hands. "Is this one of your creations, Georgine? It smells wonderful." "It's actually your mother's recipe," I said, hoping to score a point with Eleanor. "The apple pie with cinnamon and cardamom." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "How ambitious of you. I hope you found the right apples. They make all the difference." And just like that, any hope of approval was dashed before we even entered the main hall. The Williams' grand foyer was transformed into a winter wonderland, with garlands of evergreen wrapped around the staircase, and a 12-foot Christmas tree adorned with antique ornaments that had been in the family for generations. Crystal champagne flutes were being passed by hired waitstaff, and the air was filled with classical Christmas music from a string quartet in the corner. Eleanor led James away almost immediately to introduce him to a potential client, leaving me alone with my glass of champagne. I smoothed down my dress and took a deep breath, scanning the room for a friendly face. Before I could locate James's cousins, I heard the unmistakable sound of Eleanor's delighted exclamation. "Catherine, Robert, you're here at last." I turned to see Catherine and Robert making their entrance. Catherine was a vision in a cream-coloured designer dress that perfectly showcased her tiny baby bump. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, and diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat. Robert stood proudly beside her in a perfectly tailored suit, his hand protectively at the small of her back. Eleanor rushed to embrace them both, gushing over Catherine's appearance. "You are absolutely glowing. My dear, pregnancy suits you so beautifully. That dress is exquisite. Is it Valentino?" "Yes, a gift from Robert," Catherine replied with practiced modesty. "You know how he spoils me." "And as he should," Eleanor agreed, linking her arm through Catherine's and guiding her further into the party. "Come, the Harringtons are dying to hear about your nursery plans. They've just renovated their summer home in Martha's Vineyard and would love your opinion on the designer they used." I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Eleanor hadn't even acknowledged my presence, despite standing mere feet away. Robert gave me a distracted nod as they passed, but Catherine was too engrossed in Eleanor's attention to notice me. "Don't take it personally," a voice said beside me. I turned to find James's cousin Lisa with a sympathetic smile. "Aunt Eleanor has always been like this. It's not you, it's her." "That's what James always says," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Somehow it doesn't make it hurt any less. I spent the next hour circulating through the party, making small talk with extended family members and James's childhood friends. Every few minutes I would hear Eleanor's laugh from across the room, invariably standing next to Catherine, and introducing her to important guests. "My daughter-in-law is chairing the Children's Hospital benefit this spring," she would announce proudly. "She's already secured donations from 3 board members of her art gallery." When it was time for family photos in front of the Christmas tree, Eleanor orchestrated the arrangements with military precision. "Thomas, you stand in the centre. Robert and Catherine on your right. James on your left." She paused, looking right through me. "Where is James' wife? We need to get this done before dinner. Not Georgine, not even my name, just James' wife." I stepped forward and Eleanor positioned me at the edge of the group, so far to the side that the photographer had to ask me to step in closer to actually be in the frame. In the next configuration, Eleanor somehow forgot to include me altogether, calling for just the immediate family, while including Catherine. James finally noticed and pulled me into the photo. "Mum Georgina's immediate family." "Of course, dear. I simply meant those who grew up in this house," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Georgine, do stand up straight, dear. That posture does nothing for your figure." After photos, I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment alone to collect myself. As I was touching up my lipstick, I overheard Eleanor and her friend Vivian in the adjacent powder room. "Catherine is such an asset to the family," Vivian was saying. "So well connected and gracious." "Yes, Robert chose perfectly," Eleanor replied. "James, on the other hand," she sighed deeply. "I suppose we should be grateful he at least found someone with a respectable profession, though I had such hopes after he dated the Sullivan girl. Her family has been in banking for 3 generations. The nurse seems nice enough," Vivian offered. "Nice doesn't maintain social standing, Vivian. She has no idea how to navigate our world. Last month at the club, she asked the sommelier about the house wine. As if we were at some chain restaurant." I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. That dinner at the country club had been my birthday celebration, and I had been trying to be considerate of the bill since James had mentioned tightening our budget. As I slipped out of the bathroom, I nearly collided with a server carrying a tray of red wine. In his effort to avoid me, he stumbled, and a glass tipped, sending wine splashing onto the bodice of my green dress. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he exclaimed, mortified. "It's all right," I assured him, though. Inside I was devastated. My perfect dress now had a spreading red stain that looked like a wound over my heart. Eleanor emerged from the powder room just in time to witness the aftermath. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How unfortunate. Perhaps next time you might consider where you're walking, Georgine." She turned to the server. "It's not your fault. Some people aren't accustomed to formal service." She glided away without offering any help or suggesting where I might clean up. I stood there, wine seeping into my expensive dress, fighting back tears and wondering how much more I could endure. An older woman I recognized as James's great-aunt Patricia approached with a handful of club soda and a napkin. "Here, dear, blot don't rub. I've removed more wine stains than I can count in my 80 years." As she helped me treat the stain, she added in a low voice, "Eleanor was just as cold to my daughter-in-law for the first 10 years. Some people guard their family like a fortress. It's not about you, it's about her fear of losing control." Girl. Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "Keep your chin up," she advised. "These old family dynamics have more to do with the past than the present. You're stronger than you think." With Aunt Patricia's help, I managed to minimize the stain to a faint shadow. It would have to do. The dinner bell rang, signaling guests to move to the dining room, and I steeled myself for the next phase of the evening. The Williams dining room was a showcase of old money elegance, with a mahogany table that could seat 30 people, crystal chandeliers, casting a warm glow over fine china and sterling silver place settings. Name cards directed guests to their assigned seats, and I quickly discovered that Eleanor had placed me far from James, who was seated near the head of the table, between his father and a prominent business associate. I found my name card between James's elderly second cousin Walter, who was hard of hearing, and a business associate's wife I had never met before. From my position, I could clearly see Catherine seated prominently near Eleanor, engaged in animated conversation. The first course arrived a delicate butternut squash soup that I barely tasted as I watched the dynamics unfold around me. James kept glancing my way apologetically, but made no move to challenge the seating arrangement. Midway through the second course, Eleanor tapped her crystal glass for attention. The room fell silent as she stood resplendent in her designer dress and family heirloom jewelry. Before we continue our wonderful meal, I wanted to take a moment to recognize some very special news. Eleanor announced, her face glowing with pride. As many of you know, our Catherine is expecting her second child in the spring. A polite round of applause circulated the table. Catherine placed a hand over her small baby bump, smiling demurely. "But what you may not know," Eleanor continued, "is that Catherine has also been selected as the youngest ever chairperson for the Children's Hospital Spring Benefit. Her work has already secured record donations, and the event promises to be the highlight of the social season." More enthusiastic applause followed. I forced myself to join in, ignoring the twist of pain in my chest. My own volunteer work at the hospital's free clinic was never mentioned at these gatherings. Furthermore, Eleanor added, Robert and Catherine have just closed on the lakeside property, which they'll be renovating as their family home. The architect they've chosen has worked on 3 presidential libraries. Robert raised his glass in acknowledgement of the congratulations that followed. I noticed James shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I'd like to propose a toast," Eleanor declared, raising her glass. "To Catherine, the perfect daughter-in-law any mother could hope for. Your grace, intelligence, and dedication to family values make you a true Williams." Everyone raised their glasses. "To Catherine," they echoed. I lifted mine as well, the words sticking in my throat. Catherine stood to speak, her posture perfect, her smile radiant. "Thank you, Eleanor, for your kind words. I'm blessed to be part of this wonderful family. The Williams have a legacy of excellence and community leadership that Robert and I are committed to upholding and that we'll pass on to our children." As she spoke, her gaze swept the table, pausing briefly on me with what felt like a mixture of pity and superiority. Family traditions and values are so important, aren't they? The sense of knowing exactly who you are and where you come from gives such strength. The implication was clear. I lacked that sense of belonging, that certainty of place that came with the right background. Eleanor beamed at Catherine throughout her speech. When dessert was served, my apple pie was brought out alongside a store-bought chocolate torte. Eleanor made a show of deliberating before taking a small slice of my pie. "How quaint that you attempted my grandmother's recipe, Georgine," she said after a tiny taste. "It's certainly different from the original, perhaps a bit too sweet. Grandmother always said vulgarity was found in excess." I swallowed hard, remembering how I had meticulously followed her recipe to the letter. The conversation shifted to summer vacation plans, with Eleanor discussing the family's annual trip to their house in the Hamptons. "Catherine and Robert will have the new baby by then, of course, but the sea air will be good for both mother and child," Eleanor said. "And we've invited the Blakesleys to join us for the 4th of July weekend. Their son Andrew just made partner at his law firm." Kate, I noticed that there was no mention of James and me joining this family vacation, though it was supposedly a tradition for all family members. Robert and Catherine's new home will be featured in the spring issue of Home and Design, Eleanor announced to the table. The photographer was simply amazed at Catherine's eye for detail. It's proof that good breeding shows in every aspect of life. I felt each word like a dart aimed at my lack of good breeding. Next to me, Walter had fallen asleep and the business associate's wife was texting under the table, leaving me with no buffer against Eleanor's barbs. As coffee was served, Eleanor stood again to make what she called her annual Christmas reflection. Family is everything. She began looking around the table, but somehow managing to never let her gaze fall on me. The Williams name has stood for excellence and dignity for generations. We maintain our standards because we understand the responsibility that comes with privilege. She continued with anecdotes about Williams family traditions and achievements, each story emphasizing bloodlines and social connections. Then she turned to Catherine with a warm smile. I'm particularly grateful this year for Catherine's dedication to maintaining these standards. In fact, I think we could all learn from her example. Eleanor's gaze finally found me, her smile turning sharp. Perhaps, Catherine, you might consider taking Georgine under your wing, helping her with some of the finer points of etiquette and social graces. I'm sure she would benefit from your guidance. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Catherine looked momentarily embarrassed, but quickly composed herself. I would be happy to help in any way, she replied diplomatically. It was the final straw. After years of subtle insults and dismissals, to be offered etiquette lessons from Catherine in front of the entire family and their social circle was more than I could bear. I felt something break loose inside me, a dam of pent-up hurt and anger finally giving way. In that moment, I knew I had a choice: continue swallowing my dignity to keep the peace, or finally speak my truth. The dining room seemed to shrink around me as I felt every eye at the table turn in my direction. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a brief moment I considered doing what I had always done: smile, politely nod, and swallow the humiliation. But something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the culmination of 5 years of slights, or perhaps it was the wine stain still visible on my dress like a battle wound. Whatever the reason, I found myself slowly rising to my feet. Actually, Eleanor, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling in my hands. I don't think I need etiquette lessons from Catherine or anyone else. Eleanor's perfectly composed face registered shock for just a second before she recovered with a tight smile. Georgine, dear, I was merely suggesting a friendly mentorship. There's no need to be defensive. I'm not being defensive. I continued, taking a deep breath. I'm simply standing up for myself after 5 years of pretending not to notice the constant criticism and dismissal. The room went completely silent. Even the waitstaff froze in place, unsure whether to continue serving coffee or retreat to the kitchen. When I married James, I joined this family with an open heart and a genuine desire to be accepted. I've spent 5 years trying to meet your impossible standards, Eleanor. I've changed how I dress, how I speak, how I spend my free time, all in an effort to earn your approval. I looked around the table, making eye contact with various family members who had witnessed Eleanor's treatment of me over the years. Let me be clear about who I actually am, since you've never bothered to find out. I'm a charge nurse in one of the busiest ICUs in Detroit. I manage a team of 12 nurses who care for the most critically ill patients in our city. Last month, I organized a program that provides support to families of long-term patients, which has now been adopted by 3 other hospitals in our network. Eleanor's smile had completely vanished, now replaced by a tight-lipped expression of displeasure. You've made comments about my little job and implied that caring for sick people is somehow less valuable than planning charity galas. But let me tell you what I did last week, Eleanor. I held the hand of a dying man so he wouldn't be alone in his final moments, because his family couldn't arrive in time. I helped a 19-year-old car accident victim take his first steps after being told he might never walk again. I talked a new mother through her fear when her premature baby needed emergency surgery. I paused, gathering my thoughts. You've questioned my background because my parents weren't wealthy. My father worked 60-hour weeks at a factory to put food on our table and make sure I could go to college. My mother taught elementary school for 30 years, shaping the minds and hearts of hundreds of children. They taught me values that can't be bought: compassion, work ethic, and treating everyone with dignity regardless of their status. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see James half rising from his seat, but his father placed a restraining hand on his arm, shaking his head slightly. Thomas Williams was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've criticized my clothes, my manners, my speech. You've forgotten to include me in family photos. You've seated me far from my husband at every family dinner. You introduced me to your friends as James' wife instead of by my name. When I brought a homemade pie tonight using your family recipe, you called it quaint and suggested it was inferior. I turned slightly to address Catherine directly. And Catherine, while I have nothing against you personally, I've had to watch for years as Eleanor holds you up as the golden standard of what a daughter-in-law should be. Tonight she called you perfect, while I sat here being treated as though I were invisible. Catherine had the grace to look uncomfortable, her cheeks flushing slightly. I love James with all my heart. I continued turning back to Eleanor. I respect this family's traditions and history, but I will no longer pretend that it's acceptable to be treated as less than because I wasn't born into wealth or social standing. I looked directly at Eleanor, now meeting her cold stare without flinching. You've manipulated this family with your disapproval for years. When James wanted to study art instead of business, you withheld your support until he changed his major. When Robert dated a public school teacher in college, you manufactured chance meetings with Catherine until he got the message. Everyone walks on eggshells around you, Eleanor, afraid of losing your approval. Eleanor's face had turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you speak to me this way in my own home, she hissed. James, control your wife. Before James could respond, I spoke again, my voice still calm but firm. I don't need to be controlled, Eleanor. I need to be respected. And if you can't find it in your heart to treat me with basic dignity and kindness, then I will no longer subject myself to this treatment, even for James's sake. I placed my napkin beside my plate and looked around the table one last time. I apologized to everyone else for disrupting the dinner. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. With that, I turned and walked steadily toward the door, my legs somehow supporting me, despite feeling like they might give way at any moment. The room behind me erupted into murmurs and gasps. As I reached the doorway, I heard a chair scrape back and footsteps hurrying toward me. I expected it to be James, but to my surprise, it was Thomas Eleanor's husband who caught up to me in the hallway. Georgine, he said quietly, placing a gentle hand on my arm. Please wait. The hallway outside the dining room felt eerily quiet compared to the rising murmurs behind us. Thomas led me to a small sitting room off the main hall, closing the door partially to give us privacy, while still keeping an eye on the developing situation in the dining room. I want you to know, Thomas said, his voice low and serious, that while my wife may not see your value, I always have. What you said in there needed to be said, and frankly, it was long overdue. I stared at him in shock, having expected a reprimand rather than support. Before I could respond, the dining room door burst open and James appeared, his face flushed and eyes searching until he spotted us. Georgine, he said, hurrying over. Are you okay? She's just fine, son, Thomas answered for me. In fact, I'd say your wife is showing more backbone than most of us have in years. James looked from his father to me, confusion evident on his face. Behind him, other dinner guests were emerging from the dining room, some heading for their coats, others gathering in small clusters, to whisper about the dramatic turn of events. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury. James, we need to discuss your wife's inappropriate behavior, she called across the foyer. To my surprise, James straightened his shoulders and turned to face his mother directly. No, Mom. What we need to discuss is how you've treated Georgine for the past 5 years. Everything she said was true, and I'm ashamed that I haven't stood up for her before now. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, unused to being challenged by her son. Robert appeared beside her, with Catherine hovering uncertainly behind them. Actually, Robert said, clearing his throat, Georgine made some valid points, Mom. You have been pretty hard on her. Eleanor recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of wounded dignity. I've only ever wanted what's best for this family. If Georgine is too sensitive to understand that maintaining certain standards is important, perhaps she should examine her own insecurities rather than attacking me in front of our guests. That's enough, Eleanor, Thomas said firmly, stepping forward. Georgine wasn't attacking you. She was finally defending herself after years of subtle and not so subtle criticism. I've watched it happen and said nothing, which makes me equally culpable. Several guests had paused to witness this unprecedented family confrontation. Eleanor, acutely aware of the audience, attempted to regain control of the situation. We can discuss this in private later, she said through a tight smile. For now, we have guests to attend to. I think it's best if Georgine and I leave, James said, taking my hand. Dad, I'm sorry about dinner. Don't apologize, Thomas replied. Go home and take care of each other. I'll call you tomorrow. As James and I collected our coats, I noticed Catherine approaching hesitantly. "Georgine," she said quietly, "I never realized, I didn't think." She paused, seemingly struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry if I've contributed to making you feel unwelcome." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. "Thank you, Catherine," I replied, simply too emotionally drained for a longer conversation. We left the house to a chorus of goodbyes from various family members, some awkward others, surprisingly warm. Aunt Patricia squeezed my hand as we passed. "About time someone said it," she whispered with a wink. The drive home was initially silent, both of us processing what had happened. About halfway home, James pulled the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned to face me. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You were right about everything, and I've been a coward for not standing up to my mother sooner. Can you forgive me?" The genuine remorse in his eyes brought tears to my own. "It's not just about forgiveness, James. It's about what happens next. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when your mother treats me like I'm beneath her." "You won't have to," he promised, taking my hands in his. "Things will be different now, I swear. I should have been protecting you all along, and I failed. But that ends tonight." We talked for nearly an hour in the parked car, having the most honest conversation we'd had in years about his family, our marriage, and the future we wanted to build together. By the time we arrived home, we were emotionally exhausted, but united in a way we hadn't been in a long time. As we prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message. To my surprise, it was from Catherine. "Can we meet for coffee sometime next week? Just the two of us." Another text arrived from James's cousin Lisa. "Standing ovation for you tonight. The Williams women have formed a fan club." Even more surprising was a message from Thomas. "Proud to call you family, Georgine. This has been a long time coming." There was nothing from Eleanor, of course, but somehow that didn't hurt as much as it would have before. As I lay in bed that night, replaying the evening's events in my mind, I wavered between triumph and terror. Had I irreparably damaged James's relationship with his family? Would Eleanor find new, more subtle ways to punish me for my public stand? Despite these worries, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years when thinking about the Williams family piece. I had finally spoken my truth, and whatever came next, I would face it with authentic dignity rather than performative perfection. The days following the Christmas party were tense and uncertain. Eleanor, as expected, maintained a frigid silence, not responding to James's calls or messages. This wasn't unusual when she was displeased, but the complete lack of communication extended longer than her typical cold shoulders. On the third day after the party, James received a call from his father. I could only hear James's side of the conversation, but from his responses it was clear that Thomas was supportive of us, but dealing with Eleanor's anger. "Dad, I'm not apologizing for what Georgine said," James stated firmly at one point. "She was right, and it needed to be said." After a pause, he added, "No, I understand you're in a difficult position, but this time I'm standing with my wife completely." When he hung up, James explained that Eleanor was demanding an apology from both of us before she would consider speaking to either of us again. Thomas was caught in the middle, trying to mediate, while also surprisingly agreeing with much of what I had said. "Dad says he's been enabling Mum's behaviour for decades," James told me. "Your speech at dinner made him realise how much damage her perfectionism and control have caused the family." A week after the party, I met Catherine for coffee at a neutral cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early, nervous about this first one-on-one interaction without the buffer of family gatherings or Eleanor's orchestration. Catherine arrived looking different than I was used to seeing her. Gone was the perfect blowout and designer outfit. Instead, her hair was in a simple ponytail and she wore jeans and a sweater with minimal makeup. She seemed almost nervous as she sat down across from me. "Thank you for meeting me," she began after we had ordered our drinks. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the Christmas party." "So have I admitted. Catherine twisted her wedding ring, a nervous gesture I'd never observed in her always composed presence. "I need to apologize to you, Georgine, not just for Christmas, but for the past 5 years. I saw how Eleanor treated you, and I never said anything. She paused, looking ashamed. "I even felt a bit superior sometimes because I was the good daughter-in-law." Her candor surprised me. "You never actively participated in putting me down," I offered. "But I accepted the preferential treatment knowing you were being hurt by it," she countered. "That makes me complicit." As our conversation continued, Catherine revealed aspects of her life I had never suspected. Behind the perfect facade, she was exhausted by Eleanor's expectations. Her charity work, while meaningful, consumed time she would rather spend with her daughter. Her pregnancy was difficult, but she hid her morning sickness and fatigue because Eleanor had once commented that Williams women handle pregnancy with grace. "Do you know why I work so hard to please Eleanor?" Catherine asked, stirring her tea. "Because my own mother was exactly the same way. Critical, demanding perfection, withholding affection when I disappointed her. I learned early that performing perfectly was the only way to receive love." This revelation transformed how I saw Catherine. Not as the perfect rival, but as someone trapped in patterns formed by her own difficult upbringing. "The way you stood up to Eleanor," Catherine continued, "it was like watching someone do the impossible. I've never had the courage to contradict her even when she oversteps with our daughter." By the time we finished our coffee, a tentative friendship had begun to form between us, built on newfound honesty and mutual understanding. Catherine promised to stop accepting Eleanor's preferential treatment silently, and I promised to see beyond Catherine's perfect exterior to the struggling human beneath. Meanwhile, James had scheduled us both for a session with a marriage counsellor, recognizing that the dynamics with his family had created strains between us that needed addressing. In our first session, he broke down while acknowledging how he had failed to protect me from his mother's criticism. "I was raised to never challenge my mother," he explained to the therapist. "Disagreeing with Eleanor meant losing her approval, which was the currency of love in our household. But that's no excuse for letting her hurt Georgine for years." The therapist helped us develop strategies for setting boundaries with Eleanor, moving forward, and helped James work through his conflict avoidance patterns. For the first time, I felt like we were truly partners facing his family together, rather than me facing them alone, while James tried to keep everyone happy. 3 weeks after the Christmas party, Thomas invited us to lunch without Eleanor. Over soup and sandwiches at a quiet restaurant, he shared his perspective on the family dynamics. "Eleanor came from a family where appearances were everything," he explained. "Her mother was even worse than she is, if you can believe it. Criticized everything from Eleanor's posture to her choice of friends. By the time I met her, Eleanor was convinced that perfection was the only acceptable state of being. That doesn't excuse how she's treated Georgine," James said firmly. "No, it doesn't," Thomas agreed. "I'm just trying to help you understand. Eleanor is terrified of losing status, of being judged as failing in any way. It's why she's so harsh on those she sees as representing the family. It's not rational, but it's deeply ingrained." Thomas went on to explain that he had been having serious conversations with Eleanor about her behavior, insisting for the first time in their 40-year marriage that she needed to change how she treated family members, particularly me. "She's resistant, of course," he admitted. "But I think your stand at Christmas cracked something open, Georgine. Other family members have started speaking up too about times they felt diminished by Eleanor's judgment." A month after the Christmas party, we received a formal invitation to Thomas's birthday dinner. Eleanor had always hosted this event, and the invitation was clearly in her handwriting. After discussing it at length, James and I decided to attend, agreeing beforehand on our boundaries and how we would respond if Eleanor resumed her critical behavior. When we arrived at the Williams home, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Eleanor greeted us at the door with Thomas beside her. Her smile was stiff, but she managed to say, "Georgine, James, thank you for coming," without any barbed comments about my appearance or tardiness. Throughout the evening, Eleanor maintained a polite distance. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't openly hostile either. I noticed Catherine deliberately including me in conversations, introducing me to guests with genuine compliments about my work at the hospital. As dessert was being served, Eleanor approached me while James was deep in conversation with his brother. "Georgine," she began formally, "Thomas has suggested that I may have been less than welcoming to you over the years." Coming from Eleanor, this was as close to an acknowledgement of wrongdoing as I was likely to get. "I believe in maintaining certain standards," she continued, "but Thomas has pointed out that perhaps I've been too rigid in my expectations." I waited, not making it easier for her by jumping in with forgiveness she hadn't actually asked for. "The family seems to value your directness," she said finally. "While it's not how I was raised to communicate, I can see that times have changed." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was Eleanor attempting in her limited way to extend an olive branch. "I appreciate you saying that, Eleanor," I replied carefully. "I hope we can move forward with more open communication and mutual respect." She nodded stiffly and moved away to check on other guests. Later I overheard her complimenting the scarf I had worn, commenting to another guest that it was a lovely colour. From Eleanor, this was practically effusive praise. Over the following months, our relationship with the Williams family slowly transformed. Eleanor would never be the warm, accepting mother-in-law I had once hoped for, but she made visible efforts to moderate her criticism and acknowledge my contributions to family gatherings. James became more assertive in setting boundaries with his mother, no longer allowing subtle digs to pass unchallenged. Robert, too, seemed inspired to stand up to Eleanor regarding decisions about his own family, declining her suggestions about their new home's design and their daughter's education. My friendship with Catherine deepened as we moved beyond the competition Eleanor had fostered between us. We discovered shared interests in historical fiction and hiking that had never come up during carefully orchestrated family events. Catherine confided that she was scaling back her charity commitments to focus more on her growing family, a decision she would never have made while seeking Eleanor's approval above all else. Most importantly, I stopped measuring my worth by Eleanor's impossible standards. I embraced my identity as a dedicated nurse, a loving wife, a caring friend, and eventually, when our fertility treatments finally succeeded that summer, an expectant mother. When the next Christmas season approached, I felt none of the dread that had previously accompanied thoughts of the Williams family party. Eleanor, in an unprecedented move, called me directly to ask if I would help plan the menu, including my apple pie, that had been quite popular last year. It wasn't a dramatic transformation into a perfect family. Eleanor still had moments of reverting to old patterns. Thomas still sometimes enabled her behavior, despite his best intentions, and family gatherings occasionally included tense moments. But beneath the surface, fundamental shifts had occurred. I had learned that standing up for myself with dignity didn't destroy relationships. It transformed them into more authentic connections. James had learned that avoiding conflict to keep peace often created deeper wounds than honest confrontation. And surprisingly, Eleanor had learned that her tight grip on family control was causing her to lose the very connections she valued most. As I prepared for the upcoming Christmas party, now visibly pregnant, and feeling more confident in my place within the Williams family, I reflected on how one moment of courage had changed everything. Speaking my truth hadn't fixed all problems instantly, but it had broken open the possibility for genuine change. And that I realized was the greatest gift I could have given myself and my growing family. Looking back now, I can honestly say that standing up to Eleanor at that Christmas party was a turning point, not just in our relationship, but in how I viewed myself. The journey since then hasn't been perfect, but it's been real and meaningful in ways our previous interactions never were. When I first confronted my mother-in-law, I was terrified that I was destroying my marriage and James's family relationships. What I didn't understand then was that by speaking truth with dignity, I was actually creating space for authentic connection to replace the performative harmony we'd been maintaining. The healing process began slowly. At first, it was painful, like cleaning out an infected wound. Eleanor remained distant for several months, communicating mainly through Thomas or James. But gradually, small changes emerged. She started addressing me by my name consistently rather than referring to me as James's wife. She began asking occasional questions about my work, showing glimmers of genuine interest when I described challenging cases. One particularly meaningful moment came about 6 months after the confrontation. I had received a promotion at the hospital, becoming the nursing director for the entire critical care department. When James shared the news at a family dinner, Eleanor surprised everyone by raising her glass. "To Georgine," she said, making direct eye contact with me for perhaps the first time. "The Williams family values excellence, and your achievement exemplifies that quality." It wasn't a warm maternal embrace, but coming from Eleanor, this acknowledgement of my professional accomplishments represented significant growth. I accepted her toast with gracious thanks, neither overreacting with gratitude nor dismissing the olive branch she had extended. My relationship with Catherine evolved in unexpected ways as well. Our coffee meetings became regular occurrences, and I discovered that beneath her perfect exterior was a woman struggling with many of the same insecurities and challenges I faced. When her second child was born with minor health complications, she called me in tears, seeking both my nursing expertise and emotional support. I spent hours at the hospital with her, and our shared experience forged a bond that Eleanor's orchestrated family harmony never could have created. James underwent perhaps the most profound transformation. The counselling we started after the Christmas confrontation helped him recognise patterns of conflict avoidance that stemmed from his childhood. He learnt to distinguish between keeping peace and enabling harmful behaviour, and gradually developed the confidence to set boundaries with his mother without feeling crushing guilt. I spent my whole life trying to earn my mother's approval, he confessed during one therapy session. I never realized how that need was hurting my ability to be a good husband to you. Our marriage grew stronger through this honest reckoning. We developed rituals to check in with each other before and after family gatherings, creating a united front, while also acknowledging our different relationships with the Williams family. James became my true partner in navigating family dynamics, rather than leaving me to manage his mother's criticism alone. When I became pregnant after years of trying, Eleanor's reaction surprised me again. Instead of the critical assessment of my prenatal care or unsolicited advice I had expected, she simply said, "The Williams line continues, Thomas will be pleased." Then after a pause she added, "As am I." My pregnancy seemed to soften something in Eleanor. Perhaps the prospect of another grandchild, or maybe the realization that her controlling behavior had nearly cost her a relationship with her existing grandchildren through Catherine. Whatever the reason, she began making more consistent efforts to connect. She still struggled with direct emotional expression, but she showed care in her own way, researching the safest baby equipment and having it delivered to our home, scheduling a professional nursery painting service as a surprise, and even defending my decision to continue working until my 8th month when a family friend questioned it. By the time our daughter Lily was born, Eleanor had established a new pattern of interaction with me, based on grudging respect rather than thinly veiled criticism. She would never be the warm, nurturing mother figure I had once hoped for, but we had found a way to coexist peacefully and even occasionally to appreciate each other's strengths. Thomas told me once, as we watched Eleanor carefully holding baby Lily, "You know, in her own way, my wife respects you more than almost anyone else in the family. You're the only one who ever truly stood up to her and held your ground." That respect manifested in subtle ways. Eleanor began occasionally asking my opinion on family matters. She recommended me to her friends when they needed medical advice. She even, to everyone's shock, defended me when a distant cousin made a disparaging comment about my common background at a family reunion. "Georgine has proven herself to be an asset to this family," Eleanor stated firmly. "Her work ethic and principles are beyond reproach." The greatest healing, though, came from within myself. I stopped measuring my worth by Eleanor's impossible standards and reconnected with the values my own parents had instilled in me: compassion, authenticity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. I no longer felt the need to perform perfection or to seek Eleanor's approval. As our daughter grew into a toddler, I watched Eleanor struggle with her perfectionist tendencies in her role as grandmother. When she began making critical comments about Lily's messy eating or loud play, I was able to address it directly but kindly. "We want Lily to feel accepted and loved exactly as she is," I told Eleanor calmly. "Criticism at this age can be damaging to her self-confidence." To my surprise, Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "My mother was very strict about table manners," she said after a moment. "I was often sent away from family meals for minor infractions." It was perhaps the most personal revelation she had ever shared with me, a tiny window into the experiences that had shaped her rigid standards. This Christmas will mark 3 years since I finally spoke up at that family dinner. The Williams family gathering will still have its moments of tension and its careful navigation of old hurts. Eleanor will still prefer Catherine's parenting style to mine in many ways. The perfect family harmony portrayed in holiday movies remains a fiction in our reality. But beneath the surface, everything has changed. We relate to each other now as real people with flaws and strengths, not as characters playing roles in Eleanor's perfectly orchestrated family performance. There is room for disagreement, for authentic expression, for growth and change. The greatest gift I gave myself that Christmas wasn't just standing up to Eleanor. It was standing up for the principle that relationships built on truth, however uncomfortable, are infinitely more valuable than those built on performance and pretense. By refusing to continue the charade of perfect family harmony, I opened the door to something much more meaningful: the messy, challenging, but ultimately rewarding experience of genuine connection. As we prepare for this year's family Christmas celebration, I find myself unexpectedly grateful to Eleanor. Her criticism pushed me to find my voice. Her perfectionism helped me embrace my own authentic imperfection. And our conflict, painful as it was, ultimately led to growth for both of us. Standing up for yourself doesn't always lead to storybook endings where everyone apologizes and transforms overnight. Sometimes it simply creates space for more honest relationships to slowly develop. It sets boundaries that protect your dignity while leaving room for others to evolve at their own pace. And most importantly, it frees you from the exhausting pretense of being someone you're not, to please people who may never be pleased? Have you ever had to stand up to a difficult family member? How did it change your relationship with them and with yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your voice in challenging relationships. And share this video with someone who might need encouragement to speak their truth this holiday season. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it.